Beats Daily. I'm your host, Tony Fry. Welcome to episode number 64. Today we are talking about I Me Mine, which is a George Harrison composition released May 8th, 1970 on the Beatles' Let It Be album. This has always been a favorite song of mine, even from the first time I listened to this album way back in the day. And it's kind of interesting musically. There's a lot more going on than you would think, but it's also interesting in the historical context of the Beatles because this is the final track that was recorded by the band, most of the band, and they had finished Abbey Road and the Get Back sessions, which preceded Abbey Road. Glyn Johns had done 2 or 3 different mixes of the album and lineups and all that kind of stuff. They just could not agree on a way to get that album done. And then the movie started. The final cut of the movie started to make itself apparent. And in January 1970, the Beatles see it, and it's become evident that I Me Mine is going to be in the movie. There's a scene with George just strumming the song on acoustic guitar. Now, to this point, there's been no formal recording session. The Twickenham film stuff that you see in the movie was not recorded officially for record release. It was only recorded for the film. So there's been no official recording of I Me Mine to this point because they didn't work on it at all when they moved to Apple Studios later in the film. So the Beatles, they call themselves back together. For this one, it is only Paul, George, and Ringo. John is on vacation. And ultimately, if you look at John's track record for recording on George Harrison's songs, there was a good shot he wasn't going to be on this track if he was, in the studio next door. So January 4th, 1970, George, Paul, and Ringo meet for a session that goes from 2:30 in the afternoon to 12:15, and they record I Me Mine. There's like 16 takes done, plus overdubs. And this song clocks in at this point at 1 minute and 34 seconds, which we hear on Anthology 3. It's just a short little 1.5 minute song. And it's a 1.5 minute song with a verse, a bridge. It's kind of a finished song, but there's no guitar solo, there's no repeats, anything like that. So it's 1 minute and 34 seconds. They record it, they're done. These are the last official Beatles recording sessions. Then flash forward 3 months to end of March 1970. Phil Spector gets called to clean up this album, and he edits this song to the eventual length of 2 minutes and 26 seconds. So he adds a full minute to the track, and you can compare the recording on Anthology to the final recording on Let It Be to hear what gets added. But it's just basically a repeat cut. Harrison would eventually name his autobiography in 1980 would be named I Me Mine, which is kind of funny because he wrote the song about the ego, and he doesn't talk much about the actual song in his book. The notes for that are kind of more about ego and what he calls the big I and the little I. So it is kind of fitting and kind of shows his sense of humor that this song that he wrote condemning the ego would be the title of his own autobiography. A little tongue-in-cheek there. What's cool musically about the song, though, aside from being a good rocker, it's Ringo would call it a heavy waltz. It opens in 6/8, and I'm going to preface this already. I'm looking at the official 1970 Harris Songs Limited publication of I Me Mine. Okay, I've got the full score in front of me. This is officially from how Leonard published it. This is the official score. I don't necessarily agree with everything that I'm going to say, but I'm going to lay it out as the official publication does. Opens up in we're in A minor, but it's kind of not really an A minor. It's like an A minor Dorian, which I'm not going to get into explaining that. That's your intro. A minor, one chord, to a major 4, then a G to E7. And the reason that I don't totally agree with this is I don't really think they're playing it in 6/8. It's a blues shuffle, so that's where the triplet feel comes from. But for all intents and purposes, it's played like a waltz. Right? You've got, well, I don't know. I could argue it both ways. Because Ringo does hit a bass drum on 1 and a snare drum on 4, which is more like you would get with a 6/8 groove. But there is a very like 1. And there's a lot of subdividing on 16th notes throughout the whole thing. So it is technically, all this is technically correct. It is a 6/8. And he just repeats that line. I'm in mine, all through the night. I'm in mine. Then he switches to a minor 4. Now they're frightened of leaving it. Everyone's weaving it. And then this is what's cool. He does an E7 with a flat 9. So the melody is built on an F. Which is in a D minor chord. That's what makes it minor, is that F. Then the E7 chord, he adds that flat 9, which he loves that flat 9 chord. John liked it too. But adding that flat 9 keeps that F in the chord. So we're going D minor, frightened of leaving it. Everyone's reading it, flowing more song all the time. It's a cool little way to keep that F on top of it. And then A to A major 7, to A minor 7, to A6. And then an F major 7. So that leaves the E hanging on that. And when he hits that F major 7, we actually shift to 12/16. To my knowledge, this is the only Beatles song that even you could even argue is in 12/16. It's technically 4/4. What they're saying is you've got 12/16 notes in the bar. Okay? But it behaves the same as 4/4 in that your pulse is in 4. You're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The pulse is in 4. And the 16th notes are almost meaningless. 12/8 functions as 4, 12/16 functions as 4. But what it does is it sets up this tempo change, or this perceived tempo change. So we're going all through the day. I mean mine. I mean me, mine. So it's essentially changing the tempo. And it's not, and by doing that, it's not a straight double time or a straight triplet to compound to simple, or complex to compound. I'm tripping all over myself. It's not going from a complex time to a simple time, which would be something George does a lot. So it's giving you this perceived time change that's not really a time change, it's a meter change. And here he's just doing a basic blues. Me, me, mine. I, me, mine. Up to 4. I, me, mine. I, me, mine. And then right back into the 6/8. So when you go in 12/16, the eighth note stays the same as 6/8. So that's why at the end of that, when they're doing, they hit these 3/8 notes to end the rock blues part, and that sets up your new tempo back into the 6/8. So it's a very interesting compositional trick. What I love about this, listen to the guitars. So George does all the guitars on this one. Paul's doing all the bass and keyboards. Ringo does the drums. It's a very even split. Well, not all. Paul does bass and all the keyboards. And if you listen to the way George orchestrates these guitar lines, he will start a line on acoustic guitar and then finish the line on electric. Which is a very cool, deliberate, thought out, orchestrated kind of thing that you see a lot in his solo career, but that he wasn't really afforded the opportunity to do too much on the Beatles catalog for time constraints and maybe the impatience of certain other band members. So it's a cool tune. I think his voice sounds great on it. The guitars sound good. The band as a trio, and we've talked about this before, and we will talk about it again on a few other tracks. This band as a trio works with pretty much any kind of configuration. I think as a duo, when we listen to things like Ballad of John and Yoko, Why Don't We Do It in the Road, certain songs that they did with just a configuration of two, whether it was Paul and Ringo or John and Paul, are fine, but they sound kind of flat and one-dimensional. But adding that third person makes it, this is a good rock and roll song. And so as a trio, they often work pretty well. Obviously not as well as they would as a quartet. You know, I would have loved to have heard John screaming some of the background vocals on this with Paul and George. But it's a good tune. It's a highlight on Let It Be, which can kind of be a slow album at points. You know, it's a cool bridge between the 60s psychedelic sound and then the 70s rock sound that the Beatles were doing. It's just a cool tune, and I think it's underappreciated sometimes, but it's got some stuff going on in it. Tomorrow we're back to the Kinks. I don't have my list up to tell you what we're talking about. You'll see it. Thank you. Welcome to all the new listeners. We've taken quite a spike over the last couple weeks, and I thank you all for listening and hope that you will find us at herohabit.com. Join our discussion group for this podcast. Follow us on social media at Hero Habit, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And of course, swing by Apple, iTunes, and leave a 5-star rating and review for the show. All right, I will talk to you all tomorrow. Have a great day. This podcast is presented by the Hero Habit Podcast Network. Swing by HeroHabit.com today to comment on this episode and poke around our growing database of sports and pop culture news, reviews, and collectibles. HeroHabit.com. Collect your heroes.